Yasher Koach, Sage, and Dash. You each gave us really important things to think about. Dash, you looked at the dedication of the Nazarites and Ruth, our central character of Shavuot, and you related their dedication to God and the Israelite people, achieved through strict devotion and commitment, to the everyday challenges in your life and in our world today, whether that's improving your grades at school, or you actually cut this part, but originally you talked about giving your all on the soccer field. You made the case that their examples are about putting in the effort, about being disciplined, about doing hard things to achieve one's goals. And you taught us that dedication to something greater than yourself brings meaning and ultimately blessing. And Sage, you talked about what happens when we do something wrong. What do we do with our regret? How do we acknowledge our wrongdoing, repair our relationships with ones we've wronged, and make restitution? And Sage, you taught us that the process of repair not only heals the wound of the one who was wronged, it also alleviates the guilty conscience of the wrongdoer, and it also makes peace in the community. And you taught us that the healing is even a reflection of our relationship with God. As you taught us, Sage, the first step to this entire process is the recognition of wrongdoing, the awareness that one has caused harm. You cannot apologize, you cannot make restitution, you cannot repair a relationship or receive forgiveness unless and until you know you did something wrong. Dash and Sage, bringing your themes together to the events of this week, we might ask, what happens if you get so dedicated to a goal, so single-focused on a purpose that is giving you meaning, so sure that what you're doing is good, that you can't even see the harm that you're causing? What happens if your dedication is so all-encompassing that you justify the harm that you cause? What happens if you plow ahead with your goal and decide it's righteous and don't see or know or care who you hurt along the way? That you don't even know that your actions are so extreme that they're actually undermining your goal? Obviously, I'm no longer talking about getting good grades or trying hard at soccer. I'm talking about the activists of Within Our Lifetime, a group who say that they are for Palestinian liberation and seem unable to perceive their wrongdoing. Within Our Lifetime has been protesting New York museums and calling on them to divest from Israel. A couple of weeks ago, a massive crowd organized by this group, protested at the Brooklyn Museum, a museum that is famously progressive and focused on social justice. They defaced the museum itself, inside and out. They scaled the building to the roof to unfurl a banner. They briefly occupied the lobby with an encampment, and they defaced the artwork of Jewish artist Deborah Cass, the Oy Yo sculpture in front of the building. The police came and made arrests. The Brooklyn Museum is a public museum on public land, so the police do not even need permission from the museum to enter it, and they did so. This week, in what they called a day of rage, Within Our Lifetime protested outside of the Nova exhibit. This is an exhibit that remembers the 364 young people who were murdered on October 7th while dancing at an outdoor music festival in Israel, and the 40 people who were taken hostage. I have been to the actual Nova site, and I have seen the faces of the innocent young people who were brutally murdered on that day. These supposedly pro-Palestinian activists protested outside of this exhibit, claiming that it is, quote, Zionist propaganda. On the way to the protest, they took over a subway car, demanding that anyone on the subway who's a Zionist raise their hand and get off the train. Also this week, they targeted the home of Ann Pasternak, the director of the Brooklyn Museum, who is a member of our congregation. They splashed red paint all over her apartment building that she shares with other people to look like blood. They hung a big banner that called her by name and, quote, white supremacist Zionist. They spray painted on the sidewalk that she has blood on her hands. And perhaps most frightening, they painted red upside down triangles on her building. This is not something I knew about, but I learned this week that the red triangle I thought maybe was a sign related to the Holocaust. It is not. It is a Hamas symbol representing the next target for violence. Ann Pasternak has nothing to do with Israel or Gaza, except that she is a Jew. I want to be very clear. This is straight up anti-Semitism. Protesting the commemoration of innocent victims of murder, demanding that people on public transportation identify themselves as Zionists, which is a code word for Jew, and threatening that they'd have to get off the train, targeting a Jew at her home, calling her a Zionist when they know nothing of her views on Israel, calling her a white supremacist, equating Zionism with white supremacy, targeting her home with a symbol for violence. It is anti-Semitism, it is hate, it is very clear incitement to violence, and it is truly dangerous. This group is openly in favor of violence and the elimination of the one Jewish country in the world. They refuse to denounce Hamas, calling them, quote, our people's resistance forces. They write the word Israel with a lowercase I and call Israel, quote, the Zionist entity, which has long been a phrase used to deny Israel's legitimacy as a country. They say on their website, quote, we will not condemn October 7th. Either they or another group held a protest in Union Square this week in which they unfurled a banner that said, long live October 7th. To make very clear where they stand, on the night that they attacked Ann Pasternak's home, leaflets were left in her neighborhood saying that the Palestinian Authority does not represent the Palestinian people, calling instead for an end to all political normalization of, quote, the Zionist entity. Long live the Intifada, said the leaflets. This is not legitimate protest for Palestinian freedom, and it actually harms the Palestinian people. This blatant anti-Semitic incitement to hate and violence against Jews, this agenda to eliminate the one Jewish country in the world and the 7 million Jews who live there, pulls people away from the vital cause of ending this war immediately, the vital cause of rebuilding Gaza, the vital cause of ending the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, the vital cause of establishing a Palestinian state. Within Our Lifetime is not a tiny organization. It is not a fringe organization. It is at the center of the pro-Palestine movement in this country. It is working in big coalitions with activists involved in the college encampments, involved in the shutting down of bridges and public spaces in major US cities, and in collaboration with organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace. A lot of progressive people are caught up in this. They see 8 months of horrific suffering in Gaza. They see the starvation of millions displaced from their homes and their neighborhoods utterly destroyed, disease spreading, bombs falling, atrocities everywhere. They see Israel as powerful and causing great harm. They rightly want to speak out about it. They rightly want it to end. They rightly want the Palestinian people to have their own state and their own government and the freedom from Israeli occupation that they deserve. So they think that they're doing something good by attending these protests. They think that they're dedicating themselves to a righteous cause, and perhaps in their dedication, they cannot see that they have slid from an effort to protect life and defend freedom into hate, into dehumanization, into truly dangerous anti-Semitism. Or perhaps they think it's justified because the cause is so important and they are so dedicated to it. Our Parsha opens in the midst of the description, and we heard it, of the different roles of the three groups of Levites, the Bnei Kahat, the Bnei Gershon, and the Bnei Merari. Each clan is responsible for carrying a different set of parts of the tabernacle when it is being moved from place to place on their journey through the wilderness. The 13th century commentator Chizkuni notes that their tasks are described differently because the objects that the Bnei Kahat carry are so holy that they cannot be touched, and therefore they need to be fully covered at all times. This is more difficult than carrying burdens that do not need to be covered, burdens that everyone can see. Rabbi Yael Marans applies this to our time and place, reflecting that everyone has hidden burdens that others cannot see. and that being aware that we do not know what another person is carrying, in her words, quote, lies at the heart of community building. Knowing that there's more that meets the eye every time you interact with someone can sensitize you and open you to listening, to being curious, to caring. In this society, it can be hard to see the burden that Jews are carrying, particularly Jews who are white or wealthy. It can be hard to see the trauma and the fear that we carry. Like the B'nai Kahat, our burden can be hidden. Unlike in the extreme events of this week, anti-Semitism is often hard to perceive and harder to take seriously. It's hard to understand or believe how dangerous it is. It's a kind of blind spot because its danger is often hidden. Since October 7th, some Jews have been saying that we need to give up on progressive movements, progressive partners, and progressive coalitions. The anti-Semitism among progressives has been so painful and so widespread that some Jews say that there's no future for the Jewish people in causes like LGBT rights, or climate change, or racial justice, or even the Democratic Party. I've been making the case, along with many others, that it is precisely progressive movements for change that have made Jews safe in this country. That liberal democracy with its safeguards for minorities has made the United States a good home for the Jewish people, perhaps the best in our people's history. And that the only path forward for us, both for our safety and for our values, is to repair those relationships, those coalitions, and to find allies who are willing to take on anti-Semitism with us. Others have argued that you cannot make someone care about anti-Semitism if they don't. That you cannot make someone see your pain or your burden if they don't. That you cannot make someone care about you if they don't. And that it doesn't seem like progressive non-Jews are going to care about anti-Semitism and Jews anytime soon. This week, independent of these terrible acts I've just described, we had the biggest breakthrough in the fight against anti-Semitism in this country since October 7th. And I think maybe a lot of people don't know about it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, participated in a brilliant 30-minute dialogue with our member, Amy Spitalnik, who runs the Jewish Council for Public Affairs and earlier successfully sued the Nazis who marched in Charlottesville, and with Stacey Burdett, who used to work for the ADL and is an expert on anti-Semitism. You must watch this conversation. You must Google it, watch it. It was honest. It was sharp in its clarity about anti-Semitism. And AOC acknowledged that anti-Semitism is a problem in progressive spaces. She acknowledged that there is real danger when criticism of the Israeli government crosses a line into harms against the Jewish community. She said that it's an assault on our values as Americans, and specifically an assault on progressive values, and that it undermines and endangers movements for progressive causes, which it does. She urged progressives to take it seriously. And then later, when Within Our Lifetime attacked the Nova exhibit, AOC issued a statement immediately calling it anti-Semitism and said, quote, "Anti-Semitism has no place in our city nor any broader movement that centers human dignity and liberation." And then Jamal Bowman immediately followed suit with his own similar statement. This has not happened. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing, of anti-Semitism in the progressive movements is the first step toward repair for our people in American liberal democracy. Mark my words, the conversation between AOC, Amy Spitalnik, and Stacey Burdett this week was a watershed moment in our people's history in this country. It is the model for how we move forward as Jews in America. All we need now is for other non-Jewish progressive leaders to emulate AOC. We need 20, 50, 100 progressive leaders to do this very thing, to name anti-Semitism as real and dangerous to progressive movements for change, to talk about how it's being weaponized, to undermine those movements, to urge all progressives to learn about it, to understand it, and to take it seriously so that Jews can be included fully in movements for change and so that progressive movements can succeed. And perhaps one of the most important messages of the dialogue that they said to each other is that we don't have to agree about everything to be effective allies with one another. Jews can belong in progressive coalitions despite real differences in our views on Israel. DEI and other efforts at belonging, inclusion, and equity for all can include an analysis of anti-Semitism and an embrace of the Jewish people. Jews can re-enter the conversation and imagination about the future we want to see in this country and the world. This is a cause worthy of our dedication, and it is a process that will require readiness to acknowledge wrongdoing among all participants. We will have to speak out when anti-Semitism is being used as a false accusation, which happens when it's being used as a weapon against progressives, and particularly it happens against people of color. Progressive non-Jews will have to speak out against anti-Semitism in all of its forms, including their own unconscious bias when they understand it and learn of it. These conversations won't be easy, but these are the very conversations that make this country a good place for us. This is the road to repair. This is the path to reconciliation. This is how we find our way back home to American liberal democracy. Let us dedicate ourselves. And as my colleague and friend, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, the senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, did last night, let us offer praise and gratitude and blessing where it is deserved. He said, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for calling out the scourge of anti-Semitism, for your courage in engaging in civil conversations, for modeling the kind of discourse our world so desperately needs. In the words of this week's Torah reading, may God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God's countenance be turned toward you and grant you, our country, and a suffering humanity the greatest blessing of all. Shalom. Peace. Shabbat shalom.